So today's presentation is Agriculture in Collier County, and our guest is Jessicariles. And for those of us that are new to Growing Climate Solutions, maybe you didn't hear about us before. Growing Climate Solutions is an initiative of 4 partners: the Collaboratory, the Community Foundation of Collier County, FGCU, and the Conservancy. And its aim is to create a network of institutions and stakeholders that will build awareness of climate issues in our region, will work to protect natural assets as a focus of a way to build resilience. We want to empower our residents to support and engage in climate solutions that are equitable to all members of our community. We also want to increase the visibility of good solutions that are being employed so that others can model that behavior and we can emerge as a good national role model of what can be done. Those are lofty goals, but in the end, it's all about trying to advance a healthy, prosperous, and resilient community. And how we do this, hang on. How we do this is we do education, series like today. We also do outreach to HOAs and presentations to clubs and organizations. Bridget and I, especially Bridget, are very involved in project expertise, tree planting projects, and working with other organizations that are doing things. And we do a lot of communications. We have our newsletter. If you're not signed up, please do. Social media and other ways in which we try to spread the word. The focus of these Y&How workshops, if you hadn't been on the last one, was that our stakeholders told us they wanted actionable ideas. They wanted to know at the end of the presentation, what can they do tonight or tomorrow to live a more sustainable lifestyle? Instead of just learning large concepts, they wanted things they can apply. So we created these very topic-specific presentations and brought in local people to talk about local solutions. We are in a workshop sort of format. So rather than do a webinar, we wanted to do this as an informal way to engage with our stakeholders. Because of that, we're in a Zoom meeting format, not webinar. So please stay muted during Jessica's presentation and turn off the camera if you're going to have children or dogs or pets in the background. And then after she's done with the presentation, we truly want to encourage dialogue, questions and answers, even best practices that you've done at home. So we'll try to answer and engage in the second half hour as much as possible. And then later today, within an hour or 2 of the presentation, you'll receive a survey questionnaire with 5 simple questions. And we really, really ask that you respond. We need those metrics to validate the work we're doing. It helps Jessica too, since she professionally does this work and wants to improve or tweak her presentations. So be part of the solution and take 5 minutes and answer the survey. And without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today, which is Jessicariles, and she's the Agricultural and Sustainable Food Agent for UFIFAS Extension in Collier County. She develops educational programs that focus on agricultural production, farming regulations and policy, farm food safety, local food businesses. She is local to our area, a 2-time graduate of Florida Gulf Coast University, where she got her undergraduate degree in 2008 and a master's degree in public administration in 2012. So without further ado, I'm going to flip my screen over to Jessica so that she can start her presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my PowerPoint here. Let me not start on the last slide. I'm going to start on the first slide. So while I'm getting this ready, I wondered if some of you maybe could put just in the chat who you are. I do see some familiar names and faces, but I'm just curious to know who is out there. So maybe if you're with an organization or you're just here to learn a little bit more, just pop something in the chat.
Okay, Jessica, we're seeing your entire slideshow, not your entire presentation, not the...
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Hi, Brad. Good to see you. I see April's out there too. Nice. Florida Master Naturalist. Nice. Southwest Florida volunteer. Okay, so a lot of environmental folks, which is great. There is a lot of overlap to our two areas of interest. Okay, so I don't know how many of you know about the University of Florida IFAS Extension, but essentially what UFIFAS Extension is we're the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, and we're part of the University of Florida system. And really what we are is a partnership between federal, state, and counties to increase the knowledge in areas of agriculture, human and natural resources, life sciences to people in the community. We have amazing agriculture programs, natural resources, our Master Gardener program, 4-H, if there's any 4-Hers out there. But we're very unique in the sense that we're sort of like an arm of the university that's located right here in your county. And we're located near the fairgrounds out on Immokalee Road. If you ever want to come by and visit us, we have a beautiful garden. I'm just looking at these, the chat here. Okay, NAACP, architect, very nice. Okay, hi Mara, nice to see you all. So again, my name is Jessicariles. I'm the Agriculture and Sustainable Food Systems Agent with Collier County. Like Anna said, I work a lot with farmers in the community, so ranging from small growers to large growers, and really just connecting them with education and resources. So I like to say I hold hands between the university and the farmers. There's tons of great work happening in Gainesville and at our research centers across the state. And really, I'm just helping the growers connect to what the latest and greatest is. I also do a lot on agricultural awareness. We have farm tours. I talk to folks like yourselves to kind of share some of the insight about agriculture on a community level. In terms of the farm, I do a lot with farm food safety. We have some pretty strong farm food safety laws here in the United States. And so this is fairly new federal regulation happening. And so I help our growers kind of walk through what some of the requests are from the federal government and maybe from their buyers. I tend to work a lot with small farmers. So a lot of our big growers have the research station out in Immokalee, which is called the University of Florida Research and Education Center. And they are dealing with, new pests and new disease and all of these emerging things that really, that lab out there is going to be able to help them with. And so a lot of the small farmers in our area really do need help too, but they need help in things like business planning, enterprise planning, farm food safety. So I tend to help a lot of the small producers. Of course, we've got lots of folks that live out here in the estates that want to do backyard food production. Maybe they're just trying to get their feet wet in learning how to grow food, but they want to transition into a business. And then a lot of the work I do is with my colleagues across the region to do food system development. So we have a lot of agriculture, we have a lot of infrastructure to move these products out of our state, but there really could be an opportunity to keep some of this food local. How does that happen? It's very complicated, of course. There's lots of transportation and infrastructure issues. So how do we address that and bring local food to people? So before we kind of delve into this topic, I just want you to take a few minutes, think about what you ate this morning, think about where it comes from, and really how it got to you. So this morning I had oatmeal, and I had some cinnamon on it, and a banana and coffee. Well, those oats maybe came from, let's say, Iowa. I also had some yogurt. Maybe that yogurt was made in the Chobani factory in Indiana or somewhere out west. I think maybe Idaho. The cinnamon probably came from Indonesia or somewhere in Southeast Asia. My banana came from probably somewhere in South America. So very, very global breakfast, right? And that was just something right at my fingertips that I could eat, no problem. So when we're talking about food systems, and we're talking about how food kind of gets to your plate, we're talking about a really interconnected, complex system. Many of us think about the farming side of it, right? The inputs. So we need fertilizer and we need soil and we need, people to grow this food and pick this food. But there's that whole other aspect, that economic system and that social system of really how food gets to our plate. So we're looking at distributors, we're looking at grocery stores and restaurants, transportation, the political system. What do politics have to do with food? Oh my gosh, a lot, right? Think of that cinnamon that I had. If we didn't have international trade agreements, maybe that cinnamon would never get to, my table. We also have the biological systems. So we can't just grow food, in a vacuum. We are in the environment. We're using those resources. We're affecting the environment. The environment is impacting the things that we're growing. And of course, the health and well-being of our citizens and community. So it's very, very interconnected. It's very difficult to pull out one piece without affecting other parts of the food system. And I want to kind of go into detail a little bit about maybe something that is happening a little bit more locally. So tomatoes are a product that come out of Immokalee in the wintertime. If you are eating a fresh tomato in New York or, in Michigan, it's very likely has come from the Immokalee area or Florida. So we grow a lot of fresh market tomatoes. Out in California, they really grow a lot of the processing tomatoes, but we do a lot of fresh market tomatoes. And so I kind of want to go through the supply chain here and kind of give you a little bit of insight of what happens to food that's grown in our area. So of course, we're on the farm and we're growing these tomatoes in fields. We've got our inputs of seed and fertilizer and sunlight and water and all the things that need to happen to grow food. The next step is we have our harvesters pick these tomatoes by hand. A lot of people might think that tomato production is automated. Well, not as much as you would think. And particularly because they're fresh market tomatoes, they have to be harvested by hand because we buy food with our eyes and we can't have any bruises on those beautiful tomatoes. So these are picked by harvesters. Often they're migrant workers. They come in through an H-2A visa program. There are some domestic workers, but mostly it comes from a migrant workforce. Then those tomatoes go to a washing, grading, and sorting process. So they go through flumes they're washed in. They are graded with pretty high-tech machines for size and color and maturity. Then they're moved on to the packing house. And those tomatoes could be packed in 25-pound boxes. That's kind of the default. But a buyer might request that the tomatoes get packaged in a different way. They might want a different label on it. For example, I know Littman grows tomatoes for Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe wants their label on it. So there's lots of things happening in the packing house. And then goes on to the distribution. So those tomatoes are transported across the US in thousands of miles in refrigerated trucks. And this is kind of where it gets very interesting too. So the farmers are responsible for what comes on the farm, what they're doing on the farm, and what happens to the product once it leaves the farm is really kind of out of their control. So they kind of are responsible for one step behind and one step forward. But after that tomato goes to another reprocessing or repackaging plant, it's kind of out of their control. This product might be repacked and rebranded multiple times. It might change hands multiple times. It might turn into ready to eat food. It might be sliced or cut. McDonald's or Taco Bell may want something very specific from a particular packer or processor that they want to see. We want the tomatoes cut a certain centimeters for our particular product. So once it kind of goes through the multiple hands of the distribution and processing and repackaging, it goes to the retail level. And that's where you might find it in the grocery store, or you might find it at a fast food restaurant. And then of course we take that tomato home and we cut it up, we put it in salads, we make tomato sauce, and we make all these delicious foods with it. Sometimes we don't get to our leftovers, right? Sometimes we've got scraps that we've got to throw and get rid of. And they end up in the landfill. You know, most likely they end up in the landfill. Sometimes they'll end up in a compost pile if somebody is composting. Just to kind of go back a step, so the cull tomatoes, so at the farm, if there's a tomato that doesn't fit the grading or the maturity that they're looking for, those are culled, and they're often sent to feed livestock. They're sent to food pantries. So if they're not, you know, going to get top dollar for it for the market in Michigan, they might give it to a local food pantry. And sometimes these fields are fumigated when the market drops later in the season, and it doesn't make sense to even pick these tomatoes, and it doesn't even make sense to go through this whole system. So that's really complicated, right? And there's a lot of moving parts just to get a tomato to your plate. Think of what happens when we are growing products that are grown in other countries like Chile or Mexico, right? We're adding a whole nother layer of transportation and processing and repacking. So this is just an example of something that's happening in our backyard. Imagine when you kind of pull that out to a global food system, how complicated that can easily get. So when we're talking about food production and emissions, the research that I kind of found was somewhere between 25, a quarter to a third of global emissions are connected with food production. That's pretty significant, but it really depends on what the food is, depending on how much emissions are emitted or where the emissions are happening. So for example, with fresh market tomatoes that we just talked about, the transportation is really that hot spot for the carbon footprint. It's not so much in the growing, it's not so much in the processing, it's really the transportation. It's those refrigerated trucks where you start to see that really big emission spike. For things like, high, maybe we'll take the example of tomatoes again. If they're grown in a greenhouse that has artificial heating, cooling, lighting, well, that's going to be a big spike in emissions. So it's very difficult to say, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat. It's going to depend on how it's grown, where it's grown, who it's going to. And of course, when we're talking about like beef production, methane is a big issue that folks are concerned about with emissions. So these are going to I'm going to delve a little bit more into this, but essentially it's complicated, right? Essentially what we're looking at is synergies and trade-offs. So some of the research that is out there really does not support any claims that local food is universally superior to non-local food in terms of climate impacts or in health impacts for consumers. But then you have some research that says, well, local food is a really important way to reduce carbon footprint. And it's a really important way to keep farms viable and agricultural lands agriculture and not housing developments. So really, the research is very varied out there, and it's ultimately what it is. It's a complex issue, and we cannot have simple solutions to complex issues. The one thing that there is a lot of consensus on is that the future of food production is that we're going to be needing to produce more food with less inputs. So less impact in the environment, less resources available. That seems to be the consensus across the board. But ultimately, if you are really concerned about food products and emissions and impact on the environment and greenhouse gas emissions, you really have to look at it at a holistic way. You really have to consider the multitude of aspects of our food choices. So not just looking at something like emissions. Oh, beef has a high emission, so I'm not going to eat beef. Well, there's a lot of social, there's a lot of economic and environmental impacts that beef production has that you may want to reconsider maybe some of your choices. So I want to start by understanding that piece of the puzzle here in Florida, and why agriculture is so important to our state. So we produce hundreds of different agricultural products. I mean, these are just some of the things that we produce, but we are number 1 to number 3 in fresh market fruits and vegetables that provide food for the entire country. I mean, we produce a lot of food in actually not a whole lot of land space. So this ranges from fish to fruits and vegetables to cattle to honey. I mean, there's 300 plus products that we grow just in Florida. Agriculture, natural resources, and food industries add about $150 billion to our gross state product. In Southwest Florida, we add about $8 billion of that to our gross state product. So big business. We're often competing with tourism. We support about 2.4 million full-time jobs. In Collier County, we provide about 25% of the job force is in agriculture. We're a pretty big ag county. In the state as a whole, crops make up about 78%, and livestock, poultry, other products like timber make up about 22%. In Collier County, we're a little bit higher with crops. We do a lot of vegetable production, but we still do have a few livestock operators. In the state, we have over 47,000 farms, and 95% of our farms are family farms. So these are people that are generational farmers. They might be new to farming too, but oftentimes they've grown up in agriculture, and they are continuing a generation and a heritage of our community. For fresh vegetables that are grown in our area and in the state, most of these vegetables are transported out of our area for consumption during the winter months. So again, Anna, you're up there in chilly, cold, rainy New York, and you can get fresh, delicious vegetables from Southwest Florida. This is where really our farmers are making their money. So they're able to ship this product across the US and get top dollar for it, because everywhere else is freezing and we are 75 degrees. So one way that farmers are really trying to reduce their impact on the environment is through things like precision agriculture. So really fertilizing crops with the appropriate amount of fertilizer, just what the plant needs. Anything more than that is going to leach into the environment. It's going to be wasted money. It's going to impact the lands around them. Many of the farmers that I speak with are environmentalists at heart. They work the land every day. They're interacting with the natural resource that they oversee. And so they want to do what's best, and they want to make sure that they're not impacting the land in a negative way. So again, going back to this idea that the future of food is really to increase yields with less inputs. Well, that has a lot to do with breeding. It's going to be trying to produce more food in a smaller space so that we're reducing our impact on the land and reducing our footprint. Another aspect of Florida agriculture is the cattle industry. And I really am interested in having some conversations after this and getting some more input from those of you that are in the environmental world. But I feel like in the past, maybe 10, 15 years, maybe the environmental world and the agricultural world are starting to come together a little bit more, because there's so much overlap in what we do and what we want to protect. So agriculture and forest lands make up about 2/3 of the land in Florida, and the cattle industry in particular and our ranches are very critical to our water supply, our air quality, biodiversity. I mean, if you've ever been to some of these ranches, they're absolutely gorgeous. They're usually managed very well. And so a lot of, wildlife and biodiversity is attracted to these areas. And again, we have some significant water issues in the state. This is an important area for our water to get filtered as it kind of moves down the state. It's also important to the heritage of Florida. So again, many of our farmers and cattle ranches are generational in the state, and they've grown up doing this. They want to continue doing this. Really, it's about keeping places like this productive financially for these folks so that we can protect them, that we can get the benefit of the biodiversity and the wildlife and some of the habitat conservation. And there's some interesting programs happening in the state to make that a reality. In the US, we have about, for all livestock, which emissions, which includes beef, dairy, sheep, and also includes the actual feed for growing the livestock, really only about 4% of those whole greenhouse gas emissions as a whole come from the livestock industry. So it's not as much as you actually might think. Here in Florida, we don't really have a lot of information and research about what our grasslands are doing and how they have impacted greenhouse gas emissions. But there is some interesting research happening up at Buck Island Ranch with Archibald Station. And basically what they're starting to find is that these open pasture lands, these grazed pastures, are actually becoming like a carbon sink. So they're absorbing more through photosynthesis, and they're actually releasing through respiration. So it's starting to become some research that people are looking more into. The latest I saw was that the cattle there was actually responsible somewhere between 20 and 30% of those methane emissions, but the wetland soils were actually a major source of methane in those subtropical areas. And that's kind of a known fact that wetlands are a significant source of methane in subtropical areas. So again, we don't have a lot of that data specifically for our region, but we need it because we need to be making better policy decisions to help support our environment, help support our agriculture. And really, ultimately, I think what we're trying to do is, mitigate those impacts of climate change. We want to keep carbon in those pasture lands. We want to keep, for example, so really we want to limit that conversion from agricultural lands to rural, residential, housing tracts, golf courses. We see it all over the place. For those of you that have grown up in the area or have lived here for a very long time, you see that conversion happening. So it can be easy to point the finger at the agricultural community and say, oh, the food is what's, causing all this negative impact on the environment and greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, it has a role, right? People need to eat. It's kind of just the way things are. But really, we want to protect these lands because they are very important to our natural resources. The more housing that we have, the more that we get this kind of conversion, the less we have opportunity for emissions to be captured maybe in a carbon sink like a pasture land. So here's just kind of a little snapshot of what we're dealing with here in Southwest Florida in terms of agricultural lands. So we have about 1.3 million acres or about 31% of our land in ag. And as you can see, a significant amount of that is pasture lands. Vegetables are not as much. They're our high producing product. We produce a ton of vegetables. And I mean that literally tons and tons and tons of vegetables and actually not that much land. So I kind of want to share a few things that you can think of as you move forward in your food purchases in order to support our Florida farmers. Because again, if our growers and our producers can't be successful and can't make money doing what they're doing, they're not going to exist. And if they don't exist, then those lands don't exist. So the first thing you can do is look for the Fresh from Florida logo in the grocery store, and you've probably seen this. This is a program that is from the state of Florida through FDACS, which is the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences or Consumer Services. And here's an example of the product that you can look for. Basically, our Florida farmers sign up with this program and they can use this in labeling so that it's easy to identify when you go to the grocery store. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll see C&B Farms. Their green peppers, that's Mr. Chuck Oburn. He's out in Clewiston. He is a wonderful Florida farmer, very sustainable, sustainability conscious. He does organic and conventional production. And it's just cool to see his product in the store and know, I know that guy. I've been to his farm. He lives right in our backyard. We should be supporting him. So when you see that Fresh from Florida label, you should definitely pick it up. The other thing that you can just be aware of and know is that we have the benefit of eating a lot in season. Again, I don't think that necessarily eating in season is going to greatly, impact your carbon footprint. But just know that we have a lot of product that's available throughout the entire year, whether it's vegetables in the wintertime or tropical fruits in the summer. You can always access local food, which is pretty unique. Not a lot of places in the United States have that. One thing that we're focusing on here in the region is a new brand called Southwest Florida Fresh. And essentially what this is it's a collaboration between our farmers, the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council, University of Florida IFAS Extension, to kind of be able to market our region even more narrowly. We are a place that is known for growing fresh fruits and vegetables. We really should be pushing that. We have a lot of people that want to access local foods. They want to support our farmers, but they don't know how to do it. It's not so easy. And so what this website is at this point, it's just a website, is you can go online, you can look for local producers, you can look at markets. And so visit a farmer's market, go to a local retailer that might be selling product from our farmers. Some of our local retailers that carry local products, Seed to Table, Food and Thought, Wynn's Market, the local Ada's up in Fort Myers. It can be really challenging finding local foods and restaurants serving local foods because there's really no comprehensive guide. We're hoping that the Southwest Florida Fresh brand will help mitigate some of that. So you could go to the website, www.swflfresh.com, and see a listings of producers and local restaurants serving local food and things like that, breweries. I mean, the list could go on and on. We're just kind of getting it started now. But, there's really no place to go to say, I want to eat a local fare. You really have to know the restaurant, know the chefs, and talk to the people that work there. Another thing you can do is visit some of the farm stands. So like South Naples, Citrus Grove has a great little farm stand. They have a really good ice cream down there, and they're selling some local products and some citrus. Rosie Tomorrow's up in Fort Myers. They do a farm to table dinner. So you really just have to do a little bit of digging, but you can find farmers that are offering different events that you can go and support, especially the small farmers. It's very difficult to make money off selling fruits and vegetables these days. So they're often trying to diversify their income by having farm stands, or maybe they're having a yoga retreat, or they're doing an Airbnb like this little farm out in Picayune Forest. So, if you get a chance to support these growers, you should do it. Of course, you can visit that swflfresh.com website. Again, this is hopefully the goal of this is to kind of create this comprehensive guide so that you can go online and look for, agritourism events or local food or farmers markets. Here's an example of Francis Farm up in Punta Gorda that's actually selling some microgreens. She's using the Southwest Fresh logo. So the idea is that someday you'll be able to go to the farmer's market or the grocery store or, Seed to Table and be able to see this product and know not only was this grown in Florida, but this was grown right here in Southwest Florida. The other thing you can do is join Extension. So we have lots of ag tours, lots of opportunities to interact with growers. Never be afraid to stop by a farm. Yeah, they're busy. Yeah, it's a working farm, but farming is very mysterious and people don't know a lot about it. So the more you can interact with these producers and the growers, the more you'll kind of understand the importance of what they're doing and why we want to keep folks like that in our community. So we have our annual ag tour that's usually happening in March. I'm supposed to be meeting with my boss today actually to figure out how we're going to do that moving forward for the spring. We've had to cancel it the past 2 years due to COVID. We pretty much cram people on a bus and take them to a bunch of different farms. So not ideal for these times. But if you are interested in coming on the ag tour, let me know, send me an email and we'll get you registered. And then the last thing that you can do is really waste less. So, you know how resource intensive it is to produce food. And I'm guilty of it. I don't get to my leftovers. I don't get to those fresh strawberries, even though I know how much it took to grow them. But things that you can do is really just wasting less food is a great step. Even if you say, I'm going to continue to eat meat, I'm going to continue to eat food from anywhere I want, that's totally fine. But if you waste less, that's a step in the right direction. And really the ways that you can do that is learning proper techniques to preserving food, keeping food fresh. University of Florida IFAS Extension has tons of publications on it. And if you're interested in some of that information, I'm happy to send it to you. So again, here's kind of some of the things that you can do moving forward to kind of, support our farmers, support a little bit more of thoughtful food purchases. And you're always welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. So with that, do you want me to stop sharing the screen?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Sure.
That was very interesting. I never actually thought that, I didn't know that different types of tomatoes from different places end up in different forms and functions. Like
amazing,
that,
right?
Right. You learn something. And I can tell you that in my own practice, I have seen some of these new food mannerisms taking hold. And I'll give you an example, and then I hope we can open this up to a discussion if everyone wants to unmute. But one of the fundraisers done locally where I live did a 100-mile food challenge. That means they did a fundraiser and all the ingredients for the lunch had to come within 100 miles of the location. And it was a challenge. It was to design a menu that you could do with things that come from 100 miles. And that was part of how they marketed it and what intrigued people to participate. And I think we can even scale that down. Like when you do a dinner party for friends, when you're planning a birthday dinner, even for a small crowd, if you want to take guests, say, hey, tonight I want to just point out that as part of my commitment to climate issues and sustainability, I designed a menu and 80% of the ingredients being served to you tonight are really local, are hyper local. And it's fun. It gives people something to talk about. And each of you can be an example for all of your friends and say, wow, that's something that they're going to walk away with at the end of the evening and say, that was kind of interesting. I've never done that before. And they may talk about it to others. So this is what Growing Climate Solutions tries to promote, is that each of you have the power to bring forward through communication and through practice these sustainability ideas, because each of you are a role model to your friends and family. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, because I think there are probably lots of them on the meat issue and on, personally for me, on the packaging side. What kind of packaging can we look for? So why don't we just put on our cameras if you want. Ty, you want to start off?
Yeah, I do. I do have that was a great presentation. I love the idea that Growing Climate Solutions is focusing locally like this. Question: several years ago, actually quite a few years ago, the Department of Agriculture in Florida realized how many food items were being purchased from the school districts from far away. And there was an initiative to switch that to have them buy local for obvious reasons. And it was a success at the time, but I'm thinking that was probably 10 or 12 years ago. So my question is it wasn't my idea. I wish it was, but is that still a thing, or is that still being pushed, and how successful is it?
Yeah, great question. So it is still a thing, and it's still being pushed. Like so many things that we work on, it is, there's so many moving parts. So of course, the most important part is the financial aspect. So really these schools have to be competitive. And, if you're getting, I'm just going to throw out a number, if you're getting $25 a box for, tomatoes, and the school district's offering you 15, you have to make your budget work at the end of the day.
Oh, okay.
So the finances are a challenge. The other aspects that's a little bit of a challenge is sometimes some of the smaller producers are able to meet the demand, because I let me back up for a minute. So these big farms are, in the high growing season, sending 2 tractor trailers a day, sometimes up the state. So they're dealing with massive amounts of volumes of food. The school districts are really asking for a very small amount. And so to kind of shift their business model to provide what the school district is looking for can be really challenging. Okay. On top of the financial issues. But there are some growers that are meeting the demands, and it seems to be the mid-sized producers. So folks like Oaks Farm, I believe he had a contract with Lee County School District. He was providing some food for I guess it was it defense, where basically the prisons in Florida he was providing food for. He was kind of, I think Alfie Oaks was sort of in that spot where he was able to provide that local product. Wasn't, So, and the other aspect too is many of the small growers are able to meet the demand, but they don't have the infrastructure set up to do it. So they don't have the trucks, they don't have the transportation, they don't have maybe the food safety component or the cooling storages that the schools are looking for.
Okay.
So there are projects happening, and there are, the state is still really pushing local food procurement. It's just, it's so much more complicated than we wish it was.
Mm-hmm. Back to what you said about nothing simple. Mm-hmm.
I know, right? Great ideas. It's like to make it actually happen is very complex.
Thank you.
Sure. We have a question on the chat from Tony, who wants to know if Publix has agreed to work with you on the Southwest Florida Fresh program, and where, can you see those things in Publix?
Yeah, good question. Probably not anytime soon. I think the Southwest Florida Fresh program, where it just focused kind of regionally, will probably be too small for Publix. These are going to be things that you're going to see maybe in the front of a restaurant or at a farmer's market, or maybe at a smaller retail market like Ada's up in Fort Myers. If Publix is interested, we would absolutely want to work with them, but they are really, the buyers from the Publix perspective, I completely understand, because, think of how many Publix are in just Collier County alone, right? I mean, I don't even know how many, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens. A buyer might have to work regionally or throughout the state. And so, they want to make it as streamlined as possible. They don't want to have to be dealing with a bunch of different accounts. So anyone that's able to meet a large invoice, the better, because that means less people that you're going to have to be working with to supply that product. So if Publix is interested, we would absolutely be interested, but I kind of don't see that happening. A lot of our large producers, again, very supportive of the Southwest Florida Fresh program, but they're like, I'm selling up in New York. Do New Yorkers care about Southwest Florida Fresh? Probably not. It could be a way to brand, their product, but I think if we're trying to look much more focused in our region with that brand. That's a great question.
Does anyone else have? Brad, unmute your there.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Appreciate the presentation. It was great. I just wanted to ask a question about the, you talked about the impact of agriculture on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, but what about the reverse? What impact is climate change going to have on agriculture in Florida and Collier County? Is there some idea about adaptation on that front?
Yeah, excellent point. So, it's without a doubt that climate is changing in our region. Our farmers, whether or not they want to attribute that to climate change, they do understand that the climate is changing. And I think what we're going to be seeing is a less predictability. So we're going to be seeing more rain in our rainy season, more droughts in our dry seasons, which is going to impact things like our aquifer. The little bit of a silver lining with climate change here is that we're getting less freezes, which can be a good thing for vegetable production and tropical fruit production. A lot of the things that we would have been able to grow here, even just 20, 30 years ago, like we were starting to think maybe peaches and blueberries and, lychees, they are not productive here at all. It is way too warm. And if the trend continues to get warmer, that's something that we're not going to be able to grow at all. But there is the opportunity for a lot more tropical fruit producers to come into the region. We are kind of a great place to be growing tropical fruit. We don't have that many producers. So that's kind of maybe the positive spin on it. I think in the long term, and I think it depends on the generations, how they will farm the area. I think those that take over the farm, I'm thinking of one farmer in particular, he may not be so interested in climate change, but his son is. And he's trying to look for different crops that might provide a higher yield or the same yield and a higher temperature. So it's definitely something that folks are talking about. Sometimes it sort of feels like we're the frog in the boiling pot of water. It's just like we're running every day to meet the current pest, disease, wildfire, flooding, whatever issue we're having to deal with for today. And it can be very hard to plan for that future. But it'll be interesting to see, even in the next 10 years, what some of these agricultural lands look like. If they stay in agriculture, will the resource still be there?
Jessica, I have a question around packaging, because the tomato graphic, had packaging and repackaging twice. And I've noticed that when you walk into Publix, more and more zucchini and tomatoes are not being sold loose in a bag, but actually in a tray with plastic. It drives me bonkers. I have stopped buying produce there because I just see so much plastic. Is that something that IFAS is working on? Why, as the world is waking up to climate and pollution and plastic issues, do we see big companies like Publix going the wrong way on that? And what can we do as individuals? What is IFAS doing?
Yeah, a lot of the packaging that we're starting to see, unfortunately, is related to food safety. So while the aspect of, okay, we need less packaging, we need, we don't need our bananas wrapped in plastic, things like that. I see that too. I see apples wrapped in plastic, all sorts of things. But the reality is when you see these products moving through the food system, it just creates more opportunity for contamination. And we're a pretty litigious society. So if someone were to get sick off of a food product, they could get sued very easily. And so in order to sort of cover everyone's behind, it might make sense for them to protect that product. I see it with things like gleaning. So a lot of groups want to come in and glean leftover and pick, basically harvest leftover tomatoes that are going to get plowed in or, just going to rot in the field. And a lot of the farmers are very hesitant because it only takes one person to get on the farm who's sick and can get other people sick or don't know the proper food safety handling procedures to get, the product sick, get something on the product to get someone else sick. And really nowadays it only takes one tweet, never mind the lawsuit side of it. It only takes one tweet to say, can you believe so-and-so product got me sick? And that not just, that doesn't just cause issues for that farmer, that causes issues for an entire industry. So I think food safety is behind a lot of that. The other aspect is, consumers are very fickle. So they might say, well, we don't want, wax on our apples, and we don't want, certain chemicals put on them to preserve them, but we want the perfect product in the store. And so it's like, okay, well, if you don't want chemicals, sprayed on your apple to preserve it, I'll wrap it in plastic, and maybe that will help, appease the consumer. So it's very complicated. I don't know if anybody at UF is working on packaging issues and how to reduce packaging. Even things with like bulk items. I buy things in bulk items. I don't mind, but some people don't like that. They don't like a lot of hands going into the same bin, and they have reason to. There are some significant foodborne illness impacts that can come from things like that. So that's my take on it. I don't think anyone at UF is working on that issue that I've heard of.
We have a question from Tony. Thank you for the answer. That was enlightening. She wants to know if you can share who was behind the research that claims that local food is not superior to non-local food in terms of climate change. If you could just post that at some point on the chat.
Sure. It's in the slide. That particular research paper comes from Cambridge, but I could point to dozens of different university-backed research that basically says, really, again, because this is such a complex issue, it depends where your food is grown, what kinds of resources are being used, what the economic impacts of that community are. So for example, it might be much more, and this is not accurate, but let's just say it is, it might be much more resource intensive to grow a product here in Florida, but we are providing jobs to people in our community. We're providing a national food source so that we're not reliant on other countries. I don't know how you can say, well, that's bad because it emits more emissions. Having a national food source is pretty important. Not relying on other countries for a food source is pretty important. So, when you look at, we live in a global society, that's the reality of it. And food is no different. So if it makes more resource and economic sense to have a product made in Germany and imported here, it can be the same with food too.
We have one last question from April because we're coming up on the hour. She would ask if you can talk about how bad is the bee decline, the bee population decline, and what is that doing in Florida?
Yeah, I actually can't comment on that. I don't know very much about it. But we do have a new entomologist in our office. Her name's Dr. Hamatal Cohen, and she's a bee expert. So I'm happy to connect her with you because that's really her wheelhouse, and she would have lots of information to share with you on that topic. Yeah, it's an important one because bees are I believe they help pollinate about 30% of our food crops. And so we want bees, we want insects, that's very important, but that biodiversity is continuing to decline. So I'll connect you with her, April.
Okay, so we're rounding out the end of the hour, and I would just love for everyone to give a round of applause to Jessica and for her time and the informative presentation she provided. I also ask that we're all involved in growing climate solutions, some more than others, but share what you learned today with people on social media. If you have your phone and you tend to use Facebook, post something about what you learned today, the big takeaway that you're going to do. Spread that word to others. Engage with us on our social media, or forward the things that we post, because we'll be posting. If you're not that creative, you can just forward that on. But it's all about spreading these good ideas, not just among us who took the time to be here today, but among all the people we know. And my big takeaway was I feel like we waste a lot of food, and we've lost some preservation techniques. Like, I don't know how to can things. I've never canned anything in my life. That's a great thing to do with rotting strawberries, is make jam. They don't have to end up in the garbage. But we've lost some of those techniques that our ancestors knew about when there wasn't refrigeration and food wasn't so abundant. So I think my takeaway for 2021 is to learn new ways of preserving things so that I waste less. If everyone can sort of make their own internal pledge and take it forward, that would be a really great step. And finally, I do want to thank our sponsors. Whenever you have a chance, give a shout out to our founders, the Community Foundation, Gulf Coast, the Conservancy, and Collaboratory, for keeping us whole and moving us forward. Let them know that you're learning stuff. It's always helpful. And with that, if anyone has any other comments, feel free to contact Jessica. She put her email up there if you want to close out the presentation by putting up your email. I'm sure she'll answer some questions. We have recorded this presentation, and in a couple of days, we will hopefully post it on the resources tab of the Growing Climate Solutions. We're creating a section for the Y&Hows. So the next one will be February 2nd. And we have as our guest, Dawn McCormick from Waste Management, who is going to talk about recycling right. Always a topic people can learn new things about. So I hope you'll sign up for the next one in the series and learn about what goes and doesn't go in recycling bins. With that, if anyone has any comments, please write me back. Look for that survey. Please fill out the survey. I really appreciate it. So take good care and hope to see you next month. Thank you, Jessica, so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.